So we're live. So welcome everybody to this remote interview. My name is Lisette and I'm interviewing people and companies doing great things remotely. And today on the line, all the way from North Carolina in the United States, I have Karin Reed. Karin, you are an on-camera communications expert, the CEO and chief confidence creator, I love that, at a company called Speaker Dynamics, and the author of a book just released in March 2021 called Suddenly Virtual: Making Remote Meetings Work. We have a lot to talk about, but let's dive into the first question. What does your virtual office look like? What do you need to get your work done?
So my office is evolving, Lisette. So thank you so much for having me on today. This is going to be a great conversation. And I feel like I'm preaching to the choir when I talk to you. But so my virtual office is evolving because I began when everybody else did, working from home in kind of a small space that was not necessarily designed to be work from home, all the time. And I tried to struggle with that for a while. And then eventually I said, okay, I need to have more elbow room. So actually, from a physical standpoint, my virtual office is a spare bedroom that has been converted into my home office. And from a technology standpoint, I live on video calls, whether it's on Zoom, on Microsoft Teams, on GoToMeeting, on WebEx, you name it, I've probably used it. I have a great microphone that allows my audio to be crisp and clear. I have an external webcam from Logitech, their Brio webcam, which I consider to be top of the line, and good lighting so my facial expressions are easily read. And I just I live here, Lisette. I really do.
Living in the virtual world. I love it. Do you have a favorite video platform?
Oh, I feel like I shouldn't say that because I need to be platform agnostic. I spend a lot of time in Zoom and Teams. Those are probably my two biggest ones that I use the most often. And that kind of bears itself out in the numbers that you see in terms of users across the board.
Indeed, indeed. And there are a lot of video platforms out there, and lots of them have gotten a lot better in the last year because the competition
I think
is
has
fierce.
seen, oh, wait, my competitor is doing this. Allow me to add that functionality as well. So there's been just tremendous innovation in this space across the board, right?
Indeed. Yeah, which is great. So you are an on-camera communications expert. What does that mean?
Well, it's probably easiest for me to explain what I did to explain what I do. So I spent the majority of my early career as a broadcast journalist. I worked primarily for NBC in the US, won an Emmy along the way, interviewed Muhammad Ali and various other luminaries. And then I left the business in 2004 to apply my skills in the corporate world. And what I found is that I would be hired as the professional on-camera spokesperson, but then more and more often, they were bringing in people from the corner office or the corner cubicle to appear on camera alongside of me and expect them to perform at the same level of skill. That often did not work out so well. So I recognized a business opportunity to teach business professionals how to be better on-camera communicators. So that was about a decade ago. I developed a methodology called the MVPs of on-camera success, which is the mental mindset, vocal variety, and physical factors, encapsulated into a book in 2017 called On-Camera Coach. And really have been focusing in that area for a long time. But over the past year, obviously, everybody has been communicating on camera. So these skills that I've been teaching for a decade have become mission critical for almost everyone. So it's been a pretty amazing evolution.
Yeah, I would say, where do most people go wrong with their on-camera communication? Like, what's the biggest thing, or a pet peeve? I don't kind of like that word, but what's the thing that you see people doing wrong mostly?
Well, and it's funny because Lisette, it's changed over time. Initially, what I saw often is most people just didn't recognize that the camera was the conduit to their audience. And so they wouldn't look at it. And so oftentimes this was what people saw. People looking down because it's human nature to want to seek out eye contact. And where were the people on your video meetings? They were on the screen. But if you look at the screen, you are doing the exact opposite of making eye contact. And it can feel like you were disconnected. There has been some course correction relative to that, where people now recognize, okay, if I want to speak with impact, I want to be looking primarily at the camera lens. You can, steal a glance down to see how your message is resonating, to see if there are nods or people nodding off. But what I still feel is a miss is dealing with the mental mindset, because it's not a matter of just looking at the camera lens. It's understanding that the camera is the conduit to your conversation partner. When you're speaking on camera, it's not performing. It's actually having a conversation with somebody you can't see that well. And so it's a matter of focusing your energy through the lens and really pouring yourself through that to deeply connect with the person on the other side. And that can sometimes be a matter of kind of doing a mental mind trick of visualizing your viewer, imagining how they're responding to what you're saying. And that's going to allow you to recapture some of that authenticity that's often lost whenever we're communicating through a camera.
Oh, wow. Okay. And then how much does the equipment play into it?
So I think you need to have good equipment. I'll put it that way. And
Okay.
those who are investing in having the right hardware will definitely be coming across better than those who are trying to make do with what they already had perhaps built into their laptop. There are some laptops that have great video cameras. There are some that do not. There are some that have decent microphones. There are a lot that do not. But I think those who are best in class are recognizing that in order for me to communicate in full, I need to make sure that my image is crisp. I need to make sure that my audio is really clear. I need to make sure that my face is well lit. So they've perhaps made some investments in those three areas in order to elevate how they come across.
Indeed. In fact, every workshop that I do, there's always somebody who's sitting in front of a window and they've got the witness protection program look going on. And what's interesting about that is that when we do exercises and we use a facilitation technique called the popcorn technique, which means I'll
Yep.
pick the first person, then they pick the next person, and so on.
Yep.
The person with the witness protection program look gets picked last almost every single time because
Right.
they are less visible in a strange
Absolutely.
way. So it
Right.
is actually surprisingly important, I think, to be well lit and to have a good camera. It does require investment, of
Yeah.
course.
Right.
And yeah, we have to be in the luxury position of having the money to do that, but it is so important, and especially these days.
Yeah, and even from a lighting standpoint, I think you bring up a great example, because that person who is sitting with his or her back against the window could have alleviated that entire problem by reorienting and facing the window, because natural light coming in from a window is often the most flattering and most even. So it's just a matter of changing your set a little bit and making the best of your environment. You don't have to go out and buy a ring light, even though lots of people have at this point. You can just grab a lamp from, somewhere in your house. And if you want to have two of them, one on either side of your camera, then that's probably better, because then it'll just be even across your face. But the one thing I wanted to mention too, Lisette, you talked about how the person who's chosen last is the one in shadow. That's actually not surprising to me at all, because there often is this kind of bias towards those who are showing up in a more authentic and full way. So for example, if you're on a video meeting and you have maybe 10 people in the room, 5 people have their video on and 5 people don't, oftentimes participation will be dominated by those who have their video on, and those who have chosen not to have their video enabled may see their role diminished.
Interesting, because I would think that it's the people that don't have the video camera on that are maybe multitasking. I'm just assuming that they're multitasking for some reason. And so they're just
Yeah.
less present. I mean, they are less present, right? I mean, without the sight.
Yes, and I think that that's also a great point to bring up, because we start to postulate what things like having your video off mean. Maybe they actually aren't multitasking. Maybe they're just tired of having their video on, so they turned it off, but they didn't give any context as to why they've turned their video camera off. So if you just put something in chat and say, hey, I'm actually eating. And I know that you don't want to watch me chew, like that takes all of the mystery out of it. But we have a tendency to kind of guess what different signals are being sent. And oftentimes they're wrong, right?
Yeah, we make negative assumptions. naturally, I feel. So it's like whatever you don't want them to have been doing, that's what you think that they're doing
Right.
somehow. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very interesting. So I want to switch a little bit and dive into your book,
Great.
Suddenly Virtual, Making Remote Meetings Work. So now we're moving from, okay, camera, being on camera into meeting online.
Yes.
And I think we can all agree that most online meetings are terrible, and they're terrible for a number of reasons. But why do you think that most online meetings are terrible?
Well, I would probably couch it with the fact that most people think most meetings in general are not productive.
Fair.
I mean, the meetings have been maligned for an awfully long time and for good reason. So there are a lot of best practices for meetings prior to COVID that were not followed. A lot of them are common sense, but my co-author, Dr. Joseph Allen, would say they're uncommonly practiced. So things like having an agenda sent out in advance, starting and stopping a meeting on time, having the right number of people in a room. Oftentimes these were not done. But if you put it into a virtual setting and you commit the same acts of omission or of commission, they become exacerbated in this environment. So there's a lot of reasons why virtual meetings are often not satisfying, productive, or effective. So some of them are due to not following best practices of old, but also some of them are due to the fact that they shouldn't be happening in the first place. One of the things that happened initially is that any human touch point, uh, there was this urge to make them all into video meetings. And so you ended up with these 8-hour days of back to back to back to back Zoom meetings, WebEx meetings, Teams meetings. And it became incredibly exhausting, which makes a lot of sense because it requires so much more of your brain, so much more energy when you're in a virtual meeting versus whenever you're in one in the same room, co-located with your fellow attendees. So what I would say is the first thing that people should do to kind of correct this, what I would call Zoom abuse, is think first, should this be a meeting at all? If it's information transfer, a quick information transfer, can that be in the form of an email, a message you send out on a Slack channel, a text, or even a phone call? But if it is something where you need to make a decision, collaborate, have a conversation, delve into dialogue, then yeah, that probably should be a meeting. And if you're having a virtual meeting of that magnitude, you should definitely have your video on. Which brings me to my next problem that I see a lot. A lot of people are still not turning their video on. And video in a virtual meeting is one of the most powerful tools that you have to make them really effective.
So let's see, I had a thought and then I lost it. But so why is video then so important in an online meeting? Let's go with
Well,
that.
think about how we communicate. So up to 55% of how we communicate a message is through our body language. And if you have your video off, that body language is silent. So as a speaker, you want to be able to communicate the intent of your message as clearly as possible. And your body language is going to allow you to do that. If you are a speaker watching people in your audience, you want to ensure that they have their cameras on too, because you want to be able to tell the impact of your message. Because that's one of the things that we miss oftentimes whenever we're communicating through a camera. When you're talking to somebody face to face, you are reading their response to your message. If they're nodding, great. If they're looking confused, then you think, oh, okay, I need to either explain this more clearly, or I need to adjust my delivery accordingly. It's more difficult to do that when you're speaking to a camera. It's almost impossible to do if you're speaking to a camera and you have everybody in their gallery view with just their names in black boxes. So that's why video is so critical in terms of just making sure that people understand what you're saying, and you can read how it's being received.
Why is then video so much more exhausting than an in-person meeting? We can have meetings all day in person, and it's still not as exhausting as a 3-hour Zoom meeting or a
Right.
whatever video meeting. So what makes it so tiring?
Well, there are a variety of different reasons for this, and there's still research being done. I can just give you a couple of examples. First of all, whenever you are on a video meeting, you are on. the entire time, meaning like you are on. And in some ways, you have more what's called emotional labor, where you have to do something called surface acting, where you have to appear to be engaged the entire time, even if you've got like complete and total chaos going on around you. And surface acting is a really exhausting thing for people to have to go through. Another challenge is that whenever we're talking to people in person, we can pretty easily read their body language. Whenever you're in video in a virtual setting, you have nonverbals to read, but you have fewer data points. And so it makes it exhausting, especially if you have multiple people in a meeting, to try to read everybody's body language at one time. And that causes an additional cognitive burden and a cognitive load, which also is draining. And also it's just a matter of, endurance. Oftentimes you have breaks, that are built into your day whenever you have those meetings, but there are fewer breaks, I would say, in a virtual setting today. I have often had a situation where people have been late to a meeting and they said, I apologize, but my meeting went over. And as soon as that meeting goes over, then they're behind for the entire day. And then you don't even have an opportunity to debrief on what occurred in the previous meeting or prepare for the next meeting. And so you're constantly feeling like you're not getting time to task switch and really be able to take the information from each meeting and do something with it.
Indeed, I'm a person that doesn't transition well, and I need time in between my activities for some. It's just the way I am. I've sort of come to accept it. And when I worked in an office, indeed, that time when the meeting ends and you at least walk to the next conference room, that was just enough time to transition. And now
Yes.
it's a button. It's like we
Yes.
don't even stand up. We push a button to get to the next one. So yeah, it is indeed. I'm a big believer of breaks in between meetings. Is there scientific data out there about how many breaks we should be taking?
There actually is, and I want to make sure that I have this quoted correctly. I was just talking to Joe about it yesterday. So, if you have a meeting that's going to go longer than an hour, then you need to take at least a break in there somewhere. If you're getting into two hours, then you're talking about probably 3 breaks, maybe. Anything beyond it. So you just think about at least 1 break per hour, I would say, if not more. At about 40 minutes, that's when you start hitting a wall. So, maybe you can push through it if it's an additional 20 minutes, but if you're talking about an hour and a half meeting, I would say break at 45 minutes, allow everybody to have a brain reboot rather, bio break, extra cup of coffee, just something to allow them to stretch and be able to reconnect. It makes a big difference. And I like to provide 10-minute breaks whenever I do it, so people have a genuine break. It's not these 5 minutes where you feel like you're just running back and forth, and
Yeah,
you're
run up
not.
the stairs and down the
Exactly,
stairs.
exactly. It's almost more stressful having a 5-minute break. 10 minutes gives you a little bit more time to just step away.
And let's dive into actual virtual meetings. What are some of the other components that make remote meetings work?
One of the things that I think people overlook is what happens before the meeting. So, for example, there's not a whole lot of forethought in making them engaging. And it's so easy for people to tune out, right? We have all these distractions in our own space. And then people on the other side have distractions in their own space. So, the main idea is trying to move people from the default position of passive observer into one of active participant. So we've been conditioned over time to engage with screens as something that we watch. We watch TV, we watch a movie, but now we are requiring people to be actively participating through screens. So you have to be really intentional in your approach, and it begins before you even have a meeting. So for example, set expectations in advance. Send out not just a calendar invite with a link to Zoom, or whatever you're using. Let people know what you're going to be talking about. Create an agenda so they know what content is being covered, get them invested in what's being presented so that it's relevant for them. I would also suggest that if you're dealing with an external stakeholder, send along a link to a video tutorial or a link to text, which is kind of like how to get started on whatever platform you're using, because that removes one of the barriers to entry. It makes people at least have a little bit more background on how to just navigate the tool itself. And then I would always suggest encouraging people to turn their webcam on. And you can do that by first saying that you plan on turning yours on, and then give some reasons why. Maybe you say, I like to be able to put a name with a face, or I just find that having video on makes for a richer meeting experience for all of us. And that might get them thinking about why video might be something that they want to take advantage of as well. And at a minimum, it puts them on notice that this is planned to be a video meeting, and hopefully they will reciprocate.
Right, at least sets the expectation for this is the kind of meeting that it's going to be. And I
Yeah.
love this. I love this phrase that you just said. We want to go from a passive observer to an active participant. And I think that
Yes.
is indeed one of the main things of meetings is we're used to television and our Netflix, and we could just sit back and relax and watch a show. And a lot of us come to meetings with that same attitude.
Yeah.
And it made me think I used to work for a company where we had a policy of there were no meetings allowed, but if you wanted one, you had to convince people why they should come to your meeting. And it
Yeah.
changed the game. I mean, it was amazing how few meetings we had and how productive the ones that we did have were just from
Right.
that alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if people are more strategic in their approach, a lot of these concerns that people have about just, the exhaustion of being on video calls all the time will start to dissipate, because the meetings that they do have will actually be worth their time and not just, something that's taking up their calendar.
Right. And you're not going to just be sitting there while other people talk. You'll be an active participant, hopefully, if it's
Exactly.
done well.
Right.
So one of the things that's starting to happen now is we're going in and out of lockdowns depending on where we are in the world. And it's becoming increasingly obvious that we're moving towards a hybrid method of working in the future, which
Yes.
on the one hand, wonderful. It gives everybody the maximum amount of freedom to work when and where we're most productive. And
Right.
on the other hand, it is admittedly the worst and most difficult way to work and to meet, where you have some people in person and some people remote, or you have two conference rooms with people in person and then a couple of people remote. How do we make hybrid meetings work?
And that's something that Joe and I are starting to delve into right now as we're continue our collaboration together. And it is going to be very challenging, especially for meeting leaders, because at the heart of a hybrid workforce are hybrid meetings. But one of the things that we've been talking about is dealing with what we call the network effect. Whenever you are meeting in person, everybody's in the same room. That's one network, and that network can communicate amongst themselves very efficiently. When you are meeting virtually, even, everybody kind of shows up in a very egalitarian way on their screen. And that's one network as well. But the hybrid meeting looks like this. You've got three people who are in a conference room over here, co-located. You've got three people in a conference room over here, co-located. And then you've got five people who are joining on their individual webcams. All of these people need to talk to each other. How do you get that to work? So it will require some very active facilitation and effort to make sure that everybody is sharing in a very egalitarian way. So one of the things that we're kind of playing with is, if you are in a meeting that requires a decision to be made and you are the decision maker as the leader of the meeting, you might want to bring in somebody else who can purely act as the facilitator of that meeting. And their job would be to just make sure that everybody has a voice, that everybody is heard, so that you're not trying to keep track of, okay, well, these three people over here have been speaking a lot. I have not heard from 4, 5, and 6. And it becomes really very difficult to be able to take in information, assimilate it, and then try to come up with a decision at the end. But if you have somebody whose role is just to be there and serve as facilitator, then you can get a better read on how people feel about a certain issue. And then you can come out of that meeting with an answer that hopefully will be based upon good information shared.
Oh, I love that. So, right, because if you're trying to get a decision to be made, you're focused on the decision and all the information coming in, but you're not focused on, oh, has Bob spoken yet? Has Mark spoken? Like, have we heard
Yeah,
anything from Mark? So,
yeah,
indeed, having a facilitator there to make sure that everybody is seen and heard helps then everybody else make the decision that they need to make. So,
right.
good active facilitation skills. Do you have tips for these facilitation skills in your book?
Yes, absolutely. We talk a lot about how important it is to take a more active role than you might necessarily take in person meetings. Because one of the big challenges with any sort of conversation in a virtual space is it can feel very stilted and stunted because people aren't quite sure when it's their turn to speak up. You know, if you ask a question, uh, oftentimes there will be this vast moment of hesitation. And maybe somebody has something to say, but they don't want to step over on somebody else's toes. So, what we suggest is, as a facilitator, um, cold call with good intention, meaning, try to ask for input by name because then you're proactively giving somebody the floor. And so, for example, if I'm doing a workshop and I am facilitating a discussion, uh, I will be trying to read the virtual room and look for some nonverbal cues that somebody might have something to say. So that can look like this. People oftentimes move towards the camera whenever they have input that they want to share. Sometimes it's a matter of looking to see who's unmuting themselves. Before that person says a word, I'm going to say, Lisette, it looks like you have something that you wanted to say. And you might say, Karen, I actually don't have anything to say. I just felt like unmuting myself. And that's fine. But I would rather have you err on that side than allow an opportunity for discussion to go away. So if you start setting that expectation right at the top and say, I really want this to be a dialogue, then people will know, okay, I am expected to add input here. So it kind of puts them on notice. But then you have to be less afraid of putting people on the spot and really be intentional in trying to pull out that good discussion and dialogue because that's what's going to keep people paying attention and in tune.
And what do you do about the people that don't stop talking?
Ah,
Like the ones that go on and on, they're not picking up on the social cues of everybody like, oh my God, oh my God. What do you do with the nonstop talkers?
right. The person who's like, allow me to share all of my brilliance with you. Yeah. And that's not just a virtual issue, right? That is an across
Also,
the board issue. So what I always counsel is just as soon as you can cut in, as soon as they come up for a brief breath of air, you know, try to acknowledge what they just said and then proactively steer it to somebody else. So, wow, that was really great insight, Lisette. Joe, I'd love to hear what you have to say because then you're basically taking the baton from them and passing it to somebody else. And they will have a hard time pulling that back.
great facility. It requires a very good facilitator to be able to take that in and take that baton away from the person. Indeed, indeed. You got to wait for that breath and then cut right in.
Exactly.
So another question. Let's move into, I guess, because we're going to run out of time. I have so many questions. I mean, this is very exciting. So I want to talk about presentation tips online,
Okay.
how we present information to other people. How do we get our ideas across? So often in the past, webinars have been a voice and slides,
Mm.
or we're just get right. And I'm on a mission to take that. There's so many great tools out there for this now. You can be your own weather woman. You can be, a newscaster. It's very exciting to see these tools. But what are your presentation tips for presenting online?
One of the things that I see as a big opportunity stems from a mistake that I see most often is that people will present in a very linear fashion where they will perhaps introduce themselves, introduce their topic, share their screen with their slides on it, and then allow those slides to be dominating the screen for too long of a period of time without trying to check in or seek engagement. That gives ample opportunity for your audience to tune out and be distracted by everything else in their environment. So one of the things that I counsel is getting really savvy with moving in and out of screen share. Think about presenting in digestible chunks and then recapturing that human connection by stopping the sharing of your slides and letting everybody appear back on the screen again. Whenever that happens, you automatically re-engage them because you're changing up their virtual environment. Slides are intended to be visual aids, not visual crutches. And sometimes people will hide behind them too often, especially in a virtual environment. And so initially, maybe your slides imparting some really valuable information. People are absorbing that. But there is a moment where it switches from being absorbing of information into a resting spot for their eyes. And they'll start to glaze over. So take that resting spot away and force them to be re-engaged by seeing either themselves or everybody else appearing on the screen again, because that helps to keep people tuned in. So that's a big suggestion that I would make. I would also just think about how you can chunk your content rather than thinking of it as one long presentation. Think about how you can break it down and then perhaps have Q&A throughout, as opposed to waiting until the very end and taking questions. Because somebody might have a question on slide 3, but by the time you get to slide 30, they have long forgotten it. So if you
Right.
plan those breaks, that will help people to be able to process your information better and just keep them better engaged.
Is there a rule of thumb for how long those chunks need to be?
So I think about my co-author, Joe Allen, who changed the way he does his classes. So he used to have like 45-minute lectures that he would give in person, but now he does what he calls 7-minute lecturettes, where he will do 7 minutes of content and then he'll engage his students in discussion about it. And he's found that to be a much more effective way of keeping people engaged. But there are also, as you know, all those tools that you can make use of as well in a presentation world, whether it's polling, whether it's if you have an opportunity to send people off into breakout rooms for a quick brainstorm session, bring everybody back together. It's a matter of getting people to do things. Even if you want people just to put an answer in chat, that's getting them to do something. So just always think about how you can use the tools that are at your disposal to get them into that active participation mode.
I love it. So switching context. I love the 7-minute lecturettes. What a great way to put it. Love that. And we're running out of time. So I have 2 last questions. One
Okay.
is really easy, but one. So if you were giving advice to people who are, I mean, nobody's really just starting out at the moment. I think after
Right.
this year, we've all been thrown into the deep end sort of. But if you were going to give advice to people who are just starting out, where would you start if you wanted to learn more about being great in online meetings or just presenting online? I mean, first, they got to get your book. But after that, then what?
I was going to say that seems very self-serving. Yeah, I would say
I'll do it for
check out
you.
my book.
Yeah.
But I will say, I mean, to that end, Lisette, I mean, we have a lot of content on our website, speakerdynamics.com, that it delves into all these different topics in our blog. And a lot of what we teach, it's not going to be earth-shattering, but it's something that perhaps might change the way you think about going into these meetings. So there's a lot of content that we have. There are also some other folks who have some great content as well. I would say don't be afraid to get comfortable with the technology. What I have seen across a lot of my clients is that they might have purchased the tool, but they haven't done training on it. So people are using it at a very basic level, but there's so many more capabilities that can be tapped into. And if you become more comfortable with the technology, it's going to make you a more effective communicator in this space.
Indeed, because we're not going to get rid of virtual anytime soon. It's here to
Yeah.
stay. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of people love the freedom that it offers. So
Right.
there's a lot of benefits to it. But indeed, we can't take what we did in person and do it online. It doesn't translate well.
No, no.
So I think everybody's seen that after this last year. I think we've got to get a
Yeah.
little bit better. Luckily, the tools are not very difficult to learn how to use. I mean, we're not learning calculus or anything here. There's some things that are genuinely hard. I thought calculus was genuinely hard, but
Yes, me
Zoom,
too.
it's not that hard. So
Right.
I think,
Right. But it's funny how I've had so many folks say to me, oh, I'd love to be able to move in and out of screen share, but I'm afraid to do that because once I can share my slides the first time, I'm terrified of taking that away because maybe it won't work the second time. Well, that's something I would focus in on. Help yourself to be a better communicator and presenter in this space by getting really comfortable with moving in and out of screen share. That's immediately going to set you apart and also help you to feel more like you are presenting in person. Because what I think about it, Lisette, is like if you would walk into a meeting and do the in-person equivalent, you'd introduce yourself and then turn your back on the audience and just be staring at your slides because that would be dominating the space. We would never do that. We're using it, but we're going back and forth between it. And so you want to recapture that in a virtual setting.
I love that. And I said I only had 2 questions, but I have an extra one that just popped up that I've really got to know. How do you feel about icebreakers and warm-ups at the beginning of meetings? Is it like definitely do it
Yes.
yes, okay.
I would say yes, for sure, because and that's kind of what we would call like social lubrication, and a lot of that has been lost in this world, right? Because whenever you're going into a meeting in person, you have that small talk, that chit chat that occurs naturally as you're entering the room. When you go into a virtual room, bam, you're on, and it can feel very abrupt. So make the time to have that chit chat in advance that is non-business related, because meeting science indicates that actually leads to better business outcomes. So it's not just a nice to have, it is a need to have. There's a business purpose for it.
And do you have a favorite icebreaker question that you use?
Uh,
I'm putting you on the spot here. You don't have to.
Well, honestly, when I try, because oftentimes I don't know the people who are coming into my workshop. So mine is more just trying to get an understanding of who's in the room. So for example, I always ask, where are you calling in from? Because that's pretty neutral if you're talking geography. And that helps you to find common ground. And then you can have a conversation around, their location that is kind of like a safe space. I actually had a colleague of mine, their favorite one during quarantine was, what is your quarantine name? And it's a combination of what you had for breakfast and your mood. And so she said she'd often have people who were, happy avocado toast, or something like that. And so it created like some kind of, fun little things. And then another client actually used virtual backgrounds as an icebreaker, that she would say, show up with a screensaver or an image from your favorite movie. And so that generated conversation as well as people got to know each other.
I love it. And what about, so in a business setting, if you're using a sort of I won't call it silly because they're not silly. I mean, would you shy away from I guess the non-professional ones, or would you just stick with, like, why are you here? What expertise are you bringing? Something a little, it's very context specific, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I mean, it would depend if you're talking about an internal meeting or an external meeting. So if you have an external meeting, yeah, I would not be asking for their quarantine name, but I would probably, but you can use geography across the board, right? So I feel like that is a very safe space, and it allows you to kind of ease into the conversation rather than just having this abrupt, now let's start with business, because you have no time to establish rapport, and fostering that relationship is so critical, because that's what leads to, the business outcomes that you want.
I love that. Great answer. So very last question, it's an easy one, which is, if people want to learn more, where is the best place to find you online?
Okay, thank you. Speakerdynamics.com. So that's where you'll learn more about what we do, about the training that we do. We are just launching our first Speaker Dynamics University. It's our online training because we literally were drinking from the fire hose last year. Our demand just tripled in a month. And so we needed to figure out some way to give people more access to this information, because it's something that people sorely need so that they can feel like they're more confident and competent in this virtual world.
I love it. Indeed. So speakerdynamics.com, and I'll put all of that in the show notes for people.
Thank you.
Karin, thank you so much for spending your time with me today and for all the great tips that you've given. I really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you having me. Thank you so much, Lisette.
Until next time, everybody, be powerful.